Okay, welcome back. This is the the final podcast, the 12th, that will actually see Hitler into the Chancellorship on the 30th of January 1933. Okay, so basically it all happened on the morning of the 30th of January. As we saw in the previous podcast, General Blomberg was the final sort of key cabinet position that needed to be resolved, and that pretty much convinced Hindenburg when it was agreed that Blomberg, who Hindenburg saw as a sort of staunch nationalist rather than a Nazi, although we now know otherwise. So when Hindenburg basically was convinced that Blomberg would be one of the many conservatives who would box Hitler in, as Papen remarked afterwards, don't worry, we've hired Hitler. Which pretty much sums up the attitude of the Conservatives. They believed that Hitler would be framed within a cabinet of Conservatives who would ultimately control the policies. Hitler as Chancellor, his role would be to sell those policies to the country, because he had an effective propaganda machine, and of course his party had 33% of the vote nationally, but ultimately the arrogant belief was that the Conservatives would be controlling Hitler. Hitler would be working for them. Even at the final stage, okay, remember Schleicher resigned on the 28th, even at this final stage, the day before, everything could have fallen down. Again, a good example you could use in your next essay about Hitler's tactics. He upped the ante, he pushed the boundaries again at the final stage by making some additional demands for the cabinet. So, for example, he demanded that a Nazi be given a new position called Reich Air Commissioner. He also demanded that a Nazi be made Commissioner for Prussia. So those sort of like final demands, and they are, if you look at Fisher, page 258, Fisher talks about, or 257 to 258, Fisher goes through those last minute demands. Hitler was pushing his luck, arguably. Hindenburg could still at this last minute have changed his mind, and you can almost imagine von Papen and Nazis such as Goering and Goebbels being absolutely terrified of what Hitler was doing at that stage. Was Hitler sort of like putting at risk all of those negotiations by suddenly throwing in these extra demands? Now, of the 4 extra demands that Hitler made on the 29th of January, he got 3 of them. One of them, the Commissioner for Prussia, it was agreed that would actually go to von Papen, which nominally, therefore, made von Papen superior to Goering, who was Prussian Minister of the Interior, which was another one of Hitler's last-minute demands. So again, a little bit of give by Hitler. He pushed the ante. He demanded 4 positions. He got 3 of them. He was therefore seen to be compromising. And therefore Hindenburg again was convinced, no, we can control him, Look, Hitler is prepared to give way on some of his demands. So it was all part of the games that Hitler was playing. It's a good example of how he did that. Okay, so here I've just taken a scan from pages 121 to 122 of Noakes and Pridham, which lists the composition of Hitler's first cabinet. If I use the colour red to highlight the Nazi position, so obviously Hitler as Chancellor, the Reich Minister of the Interior, which was pretty much a powerless position, remember, because nominally Minister of the Interior will control the policing of Germany, but actually policing was controlled by the state governments. So actually, therefore, real power over policing was distributed amongst the other 25 or so different states. Having said that, the position within the state governments that controlled policing was the Ministry of the Interior. And you'll notice way down the list, Hermann Goering, who was a Nazi, was made Prussian Minister of the Interior, which did therefore give the Nazis control over the policing of the state of Prussia, which was 3/5 of Germany altogether. Having said that, though, bear in mind that, and I use blue to highlight nationalists, Franz von Papen, was Reich Commissioner for Prussia, and that actually made him Goering's boss. The Reich Commissioner had greater power than the Prussian Minister of the Interior. So again, that's part of the apparent compromise that Hitler was making, giving more power over to the conservatives. Just going back, staying on the red, the positions that the Nazis controlled. So you've got Hitler, the Reich Chancellor, you've got Frick as Reich Minister of the Interior, relatively powerless, you've got Goering, Prussian Minister of the Interior, and Reich Minister without portfolio, and there was also that extra one that he put in there, the Reich Air Commissioner, that was put in at the last minute. All of the other positions were very much controlled by nationalists, by right wing certainly, but they were conservative nationalists. So Konstantin von Neurath was the Reich Foreign Minister. The Reich Finance Minister was von Krosigk. There's Blomberg as the Reich Minister of Defence. Hugenberg was Minister of Economics, Food and Agriculture. Remember, Schleicher had refused to give Hugenberg that position, and that was one of the reasons, again a mistake that Schleicher had made that arguably drove Hugenberg over to Hitler's side. So Hugenberg in the end got what he wanted, one of the reasons why he basically agreed to back this cabinet. The Reich Minister of Labour was not a Nazi. He was the leader of the Stahlhelm, the Veterans Association of World War I. But again, he brought with him a huge amount of influence, leading such a massive organisation. That's Franz Selter. There's the position, the Reich Minister of Post, that Hindenburg very famously had said he would only give to Hitler. Hitler didn't have that position. That was now given to Paul von Eltz-Rübenach, who was not a Nazi, again a conservative. And then lower down in the list there, you've got the Reich Commissioner of Employment, Gunther Gericke, and Dr. Franz Gürtner. You may remember his name from the trial of Hitler, the Munich Putsch, a member of the German Nationalist Party. So you can see quite a few members of the DNVP. Franz von Papen, the leader of the German Nationalists, obviously Hugenberg, and Dr. Franz Gürtner, all in there. So Hitler boxed in. He is the Chancellor, but the Vice Chancellor is Franz von Papen. Incidentally, another part of the terms for accepting it, again last minute wheeling and dealing, etc., was von Papen insisted that Hitler never be allowed to meet Hindenburg alone, that Franz von Papen as the Vice Chancellor should always be present at any meeting between the Chancellor and the President. Hitler, again though, in return basically insisted on new Reichstag elections. After all, part of the deal was that Hitler could form a parliamentary government. Hitler could form a government that could rule without having to use presidential decree. So Hitler insisted on new Reichstag elections. That again was part of the sort of final deal that was made, and those elections were set for the 5th of March 1933, 6 weeks later, and that of course will be a key event that we will be looking at. So that's the final thing. Hitler was a boxed-in Chancellor, or as I have said there, was he? I've I think already alluded to that famous limerick that Bullock famously quoted about the lady from Riga who rode on a tiger, and of course Hitler was the tiger. The lady were the conservatives. They feel they have hired Hitler to sell nationalist ideas to the masses, because they can't do that themselves. Hitler will do their bidding. They've hired him. He is a drummer boy for nationalism. That's how they saw it. But little do they realise the teeth that he has got. Okay, so hopefully that was useful to you. Just a reminder that there of course are some of the key texts that you can follow through on. In planning your essay, the absolute key thing is remember, don't even attempt to tell a story. Don't feel obliged to mention all the facts that are taking you through in these podcasts. Okay, that's important as well. You've got those basic ideas that are in the plan, in the mind map. They should be your building blocks for your essay. Think about which facts you will use within each of those areas.